We have incredible fans in Europe where we have our biggest audience. 2/3 of our audience is in Europe. Much bigger than our audience in the United States. You know, it's a wonderful thing.
Bruce Springsteen was never a star in the conventional sense. He didn't live in Hollywood, didn't show up at lavish parties, didn't make headlines for scandals. And yet somehow, he became the voice of an entire generation. The only one brave enough to sing about America when it was no longer glamorous. Springsteen walked onto the stage like a survivor. While the rock and roll world drowned in ecstasy, leather jackets, and blinding lights, he carried only a guitar, a harmonica, and songs like Scars. Unpolished, not easy to listen to, but so real they made it impossible to look away. He didn't sing romantic love stories. He sang about unemployed men, dying towns, depressed fathers, and dreams that never came true. How did a shy boy from New Jersey, the son of a cold, impoverished, mentally ill father, become the boss of America? How did someone once terrified of stage lights, once so deep in depression he couldn't get out of bed, find the strength to scream in front of 80,000 people and make them cry? Springsteen was once arrested for drinking, cheated on his wife, and was accused of hypocrisy, singing about the working class while living in a $1 million mansion. But he never tried to hide it. He didn't need to be adored. He needed to be heard. And it was that raw honesty that made him one of the most respected artists in the world. He's not a spotless icon. He's a man with cracks. But through those cracks, he turned suffering into music, and music into a prayer for those without a voice. This story won't make you admire Bruce Springsteen like an idol. It may leave you confused, angry, even doubtful. But in the end, you'll understand why, for over half a century, he's still standing. Not to reign, but to remind us. Music can save. But first, it has to dare to tell the truth. Early life. Bruce Frederick Joseph Springsteen was born on September 23, 1949, in Long Branch, New Jersey, in a poor public hospital just a few blocks from home. He grew up in Freehold, a bleak little town where factory whistles blew every morning and fell silent in the gray afternoons. Freehold wasn't remarkable, except for the fact that it gave America one of its greatest storytellers, shaped by its very sense of stagnation. The Springsteens lived in a small, run-down wooden house with 3 children and a father who almost never spoke. Douglas Springsteen, Bruce's father, was a World War II veteran who had worked as a bus driver and security guard, but couldn't hold a job for long. He often sat in the dark, smoking, silent. Bruce couldn't recall a time his father hugged him. He couldn't remember ever laughing with him. "I grew up in a house without voices, and then I became someone who spent a lifetime speaking for those who couldn't," Bruce wrote. His mother, Adele Zarilli, was the real backbone of the family. She worked steadily as an insurance secretary, woke up early, dressed neatly, and always tried to make things appear okay. She was the first to recognize that Bruce wasn't like other kids. He was quiet, dreamy, easily wounded. He couldn't focus in school, didn't play sports, had no close friends. The school labeled him as someone who didn't fit in. The Catholic Church complained that he didn't know how to obey. Bruce hated school, hated all forms of control. He felt the world had a secret code that he simply couldn't crack. So he observed in silence and took it all in. The isolation, the anger, the nameless sadness. Then one day in 1956, everything shifted. Bruce was 7, watching The Ed Sullivan Show when Elvis Presley appeared. The sight of Elvis singing, swiveling his hips, guitar in hand, it was like lightning struck the Springsteen living room. Bruce didn't understand what he was feeling. He just knew, "I want to do that." A few weeks later, his mother bought him an $18 guitar, a serious purchase for the family at the time. He didn't learn to play properly. No books, just listening and feeling. That guitar became his only friend who didn't judge, didn't ask him to be normal. And whenever his father sat brooding in the dark, Bruce would quietly slip into the attic and strum a few chords. as if escaping the cold inside their home. No one knew he was teaching himself how to write songs. No one knew that the boy labeled socially offbeat would one day compose aching ballads like My Father's House, Independence Day, or Darkness on the Edge of Town. Songs not made to entertain, but to survive. In a town where everyone just wanted their kids to be stable and quiet, Bruce chose the opposite: loud, honest, and never willing to stay silent. Early career. Bruce Springsteen didn't become famous overnight. Long before anyone called him the boss, he was playing music in bars to 3 drunk patrons, driving trucks overnight to pay off guitar rentals, and wandering the East Coast like a homeless musician, armed with only his guitar and an obsession with being heard. In the 1960s, while his peers went to college or joined the military, Bruce played in bands like the Castiles, Earth, Child, and Steel Mill, names few remember, but for him, they were everything. They played at fairs, casinos, skating rinks, anywhere with a working outlet and a live microphone. Sometimes they were kicked out mid-set for being too loud. Sometimes they never got paid. But Bruce didn't stop. Because on stage, no matter how small, he could be himself. Not the son of an unemployed father, not the slow student at school. He wrote music with hunger, sweat, and real wounds, not to become famous, but to survive. Each song was a silent plea. I matter. I belong here. By the late 60s, he nearly gave up. Bands fell apart. Promises were broken. But in 1972, a door opened. Bruce was introduced to John Hammond, the legendary Columbia Records producer who had discovered Bob Dylan. Hammond listened to Bruce sing "It's Hard to Be a Saint in the City," and right there, during the audition, he said, "This is the next one." But the label wasn't easily convinced. Columbia wanted another Dylan, while Bruce refused to be anyone's copy. His debut album, Greetings from Asbury Park, NJ, 1973, was labeled wordy, obscure, commercially unviable. The second album, The Wild, The Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, also failed commercially. 2 releases, 2 rounds of silence. But Bruce didn't give up. He wasn't here to attract attention. He was here to wait for the right ears to listen. In that darkness, he quietly built the E Street Band, the group that would follow him through a lifetime. Clarence Clemens, whose saxophone echoed like the soul of Black America. Stephen Van Zandt, the fiery, fiercely loyal Italian-American guitarist. Roy Bittan, Max Weinberg. One by one, he gathered them, as if reconstructing the broken pieces of himself. By 1975, Bruce was exhausted, disillusioned, but he still wrote, still played, still believed. And just when no one was expecting anything anymore, he made Born to Run, the album that changed everything. But that's another story. The story of how a forgotten outsider became a symbol of an entire nation. Career success. In 1975, Bruce Springsteen was on the verge of losing his record deal. His first 2 albums had flopped commercially, and the label had run out of patience. In a moment of desperation, he wrote Born to Run, a song that felt like the final leap of a man trapped in a dead-end town. When the album was released, Bruce exploded. All of America suddenly knew the name Springsteen. Time and Newsweek both put him on their covers in the same week, the first time that had ever happened for a rock musician. Success came fast, but not smooth. A prolonged legal battle left him unable to record new material for nearly 3 years. When he returned with Darkness on the Edge of Town, 1978, the music had changed, darker, raw, and full of inner strength. Bruce no longer sang about dreams, but about people who had failed and still refused to give up. The 1980s were his peak. The River, 1980, topped the charts. Nebraska, 1982, recorded at home, bare and unproduced, became a chilling, deeply human masterpiece. Then came Born in the USA, 1984, which exploded, selling over 30 million copies and turning Bruce into a global superstar. But the title track was misunderstood. Many took it as a patriotic anthem, when in fact it was a bitter protest. Ronald Reagan used his name during a campaign speech, and Bruce responded by opening shows with "This Land Is Your Land," saying nothing more. Fame kept growing, but Bruce didn't chase it. By the late 80s, he disbanded the E Street Band and released Tunnel of Love, a personal album about a broken marriage. In the 90s, he took another path: Human Touch, Lucky Town, The Ghost of Tom Joad. Commercially modest, but unwavering in their devotion to the voices of workers, the abandoned, immigrants, and society's forgotten. After September 11th, he reunited with the E Street Band and released The Rising, 2002, an album filled with sorrow and hope. America listened as if needing someone to articulate what they themselves could not yet name. Later albums like Magic, Working on a Dream, Wrecking Ball, and Letter to You varied in sound, but shared one unshakable trait: no compromise. And then came Springsteen on Broadway, 2017 to 2018, a solo stage show where he stood alone, telling his life story, singing familiar songs without noise, without amplification. Nearly 240 shows, everyone sold out. On Netflix, it became final proof. Bruce wasn't just a singer, he was a storyteller. In music, in silence, in a kind of honesty few dare to hold on to for life. He never tried to be trendy. He just tried to be true. And that is what's kept him standing for more than half a century. Struggles and shadows. Bruce Springsteen never trashed hotel rooms, never smashed guitars on stage, and never spiraled into drug scandals like many of his rock star peers. But his life hasn't been without darkness. It just arrived more quietly and hurt in its own way. The first crisis didn't come from the outside, but from inside his own mind. Starting in the late 80s, Springsteen began sinking into depression. Some days, he wouldn't get out of bed, wouldn't speak, couldn't explain why he felt so unbearably low. After the death of his father, the silent man who had loomed over his childhood, old memories flooded back like a delayed storm. Bruce called it a silent war and admitted he lost that war more than once. Only through antidepressants, therapy, and the patient love of Patty Cialfa did he slowly begin to rise again. But the cracks never fully healed. He would go on tour even as his mind refused to believe in itself. I had everything: fame, family, music, and I still felt so empty I wanted to disappear. That inner chaos also left its mark on his personal life. In 1985, Bruce married actress Julianne Phillips, a picture-perfect marriage on paper but hollow in reality. She was young, beautiful, but didn't understand Bruce's world, and Bruce at that point was already in love with someone else. That someone was Patty, his bandmate in the E Street Band, his harmony singer, the one who stood by him night after night on stage. The affair was quickly uncovered. The press called it a public betrayal. Bruce stayed silent. He didn't deny it, didn't explain it. But that silence, in its own way, was an admission that even the man who wrote the most honest ballads didn't always live by them. Then, in 2020, another unexpected controversy. While driving through a national park in New Jersey, Bruce was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence. The news went viral, especially since he was, at that very moment, starring in a Super Bowl Jeep commercial about America's unity. The incident led to the ad being pulled and fans wondering, could America's most trustworthy storyteller also lose control? In truth, his blood alcohol level was just 0.02, below the legal limit. The court dropped all serious charges, fining him $500 for drinking alcohol in a restricted area. Once again, Bruce offered no elaborate explanations. He accepted the penalty, withdrew quietly, and returned to the stage with music, just as he had for the past 50 years. In everyday life, he hasn't escaped criticism either, often for what some see as image contradictions. A man who sings about working-class struggle yet lives in a multi-million-dollar estate, rides Harleys, plays golf, and has personal security. A man who sings of soldiers' pain, yet publicly opposes war. Bruce never denied these things. He just never tried to justify them. I've never been poor, but I understand them. And if my music helps them feel like they're not invisible, then I've done what I needed to do. With Bruce Springsteen, what's memorable isn't how often he was right, but that, when he was wrong, he never ran. He turned those mistakes into music, into stories, into new layers of a portrait already too real to ever need cleansing. Personal life. On stage, Bruce Springsteen is the frontman, fierce, relentless, commanding. But when the lights go down, he's just a man learning how to love without hurting anyone, a skill he never quite mastered in his youth. His first marriage to Julianne Phillips was a mistake Bruce later described as an arrangement born from the need to escape. They wed in 1985, at the height of Born in the USA's global explosion. Julianne was a beautiful actress. Bruce was America's rock sex symbol. But behind the glamorous wedding were two people who spoke entirely different languages. Julianne was quiet, reserved. Bruce, at the time, was drowning in depression, stage pressure, and fear of his own identity. They slept on opposite sides of the bed, and eventually lived in opposite worlds. The person who truly stood beside Bruce, not on red carpets, but in the wings, was Patti Scialfa, a red-haired backing vocalist, guitarist, Italian-American, raised in New Jersey just like him. They had met in the early 80s, shared the stage, shared the silences between songs. Bruce had tried to resist those feelings, but failed. In 1988, during his separation, he made the relationship with Patti public, triggering a media storm. Some called him a traitor. Others said, he sings about love, but couldn't even hold on to a marriage. But Bruce wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply following his heart, for the first time. In 1991, he and Patti married. And for more than 3 decades since, they've never been apart. They live in Colts Neck, New Jersey, on a sprawling horse farm, largely out of the public eye, far from Hollywood. Patti isn't just his wife. She's his musical editor, the one who tweaks his lyrics, the one who can see when Bruce is about to fall apart. They rarely speak about each other publicly because they don't need to prove anything. Patti once said, "We're not perfect, but we know how not to hurt each other more." They have 3 children, Evan, Jessica, and Sam. None chose a path in music. Jessica became a world-class equestrian and Olympic competitor. Sam is a firefighter. Bruce is proud of that, because he once feared his fame would cast too long a shadow over his children. He didn't want the name Springsteen to be a burden. At home, he's just Dad, the one who tells old stories, fumbles around in the garden, who once lost his way but never gave up. What makes Bruce's private life remarkable isn't that it's peaceful, but that it needs no display. He avoids scandal not out of fear, but because he has nothing left to prove. He once rebelled, once loved wrong, once betrayed. But he eventually learned the most important thing. To love is to stay, even when the other person says nothing. In an industry where love is often a performance, Bruce chose truth. And truth, while not always romantic, is the only thing sturdy enough to last a lifetime. Legacy and influence. Bruce Springsteen didn't leave behind a musical revolution in the technical sense. He didn't invent a new genre, didn't redefine the guitar, didn't possess a flawless voice, but he did something very few artists ever dared to do. He gave music a conscience. For over 50 years, Springsteen has written about America, not the one from the movies, but the one lost somewhere between reality and illusion. He sang of towns with no future, men left behind after war, children growing up without knowing what to believe in. While most artists chased after allure, Springsteen walked into the dark corners and stayed there. That's why he became a symbol, not of rock and roll, but of moral clarity in a culture on the verge. Americans love him not just for his music, but because he gave voice to feelings they couldn't name. Generations of musicians, from Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam, and Brandon Flowers, The Killers, to Arcade Fire, have called Bruce the teacher who never needed a classroom. Bands, big and small, borrow his narrative structure, an opening that paints a town, a middle that erupts in emotion, and a closing that forces a choice. Keep going or let go. As of 2024, Springsteen has sold over 150 million albums worldwide, won 20 Grammy Awards, 2 Golden Globes, 1 Academy Award, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 1999, and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Barack Obama, 2016. But perhaps his greatest legacy can't be measured in numbers. It's the quiet conviction listeners still carry after hearing him sing. Songs like The River, Born in the USA, Streets of Philadelphia, My Hometown, and The Rising have become woven into the memory of America. They don't age, because they don't belong to any era. They belong to people. Some hear Thunder Road during their first love, Dancing in the Dark during a sleepless night, or My Father's House when they first realized their parents were once fragile too. In an age of division, Bruce never shied away from politics, but he never turned music into a weapon. He simply told the truth, in the voice of someone still aching for justice, still believing that art should take the side of the forgotten. He's more than a musician. He's a cultural force. He has raised funds for veterans, HIV victims, immigrants, and poor communities left behind after national crises. He doesn't flood TV screens, doesn't stir outrage, doesn't wield social media like a sword. He chose a quieter path, but always showed up when it mattered. And most importantly, Bruce Springsteen left behind something few artists still possess: trust. People believe him, believe that when he sings, it's real, believe that he won't turn his back, won't perform for show, won't say what he doesn't live. I don't think I changed the world. I just tried not to make it worse. Bruce Springsteen. Life today. Bruce Springsteen isn't aging like a monument. He's aging like a man who still has something to say, still has dreams to protect, still carries wounds that never had names. In 2023, he launched a massive tour with the E Street Band, a journey quietly referred to as the group's unofficial farewell. The tour was scheduled to run through 2025, but only a few months in, Bruce was forced to pause. A diagnosis revealed severe peptic ulcers, significantly affecting his voice and health. Many feared he wouldn't return. But as he's done his entire career, Bruce didn't stop at a promise. He rested when needed and came back when ready. By 2024, after recovery, he resumed performances across Europe and North America with more caution, but no loss of fire. On stage, he still sang The Rising with misty eyes, still embraced the crowd like it might be the last time, and still stood silent after each song, as if waiting for his heart to catch up with what had just been said. But Bruce didn't just perform. He kept recording, kept digging through the past. In 2025, he released Tracks 2, The Lost Albums, a box set of over 80 previously unreleased songs recorded between 1983 and 2018. This wasn't just a commercial product, it was a spiritual archive, a vault of forgotten sessions, unfinished demos, and musical dreams that had never found their voice. Until now. That same year, he reunited once more with the E Street Band for a European tour titled Land of Hope and Dreams. But this time, Bruce didn't just sing, he spoke. At the opening show in Manchester, he openly denounced the Trump administration, calling it corrupt, incompetent, and treasonous. No grand speech, no theatrics, just quiet, steady words before 70,000 people. Then he stepped into My City of Ruins like a political prayer. He continued the tour with songs that felt like whispered protests: Rainmaker, Youngstown, Land of Hope and Dreams. No flashy effects, just voice, guitar, and a man who still believes in what's right. even when the world no longer wants to listen. Off stage, he still lives in New Jersey, still rides horses, gardens, reads, and talks with his wife, Patty, the first audience for every new song. His children are grown and live away from the spotlight. Bruce rarely speaks about family, not to hide them, but because he knows some things are too sacred to share. At 75, Bruce Springsteen no longer has the strength to scream like he used to, but he still has the power to raise his voice and silence an entire stadium. He doesn't live off nostalgia. He doesn't try to look young. He simply keeps doing what he's always done from the beginning: stand tall, speak truth, and remind his listeners that even when everything falls apart, music still remains. Bruce Springsteen was never born to be a legend. He was born in silence, raised in the dark, and entered music like a man searching for a way to survive. No one chose him. He stepped forward on his own, speaking for those no one else would listen to. And in doing so, he stayed longer than all the rest. He's never been the easiest artist to love, too serious, too political, too much bitterness in a weary smile. But that's exactly why he was never fleeting. Those who come to Springsteen's music aren't looking for entertainment. They're looking for someone to voice the sorrow they're too afraid to admit. And he has done that for half a century, without pause, without compromise. Springsteen didn't change music, but he changed the way people listened to it, with their hearts, with their lived experience, and sometimes with losses that can't be put into words. He never followed trends, never apologized for his perspective, never softened the hard truths in his lyrics. He stayed loyal to pain and turned it into something that could be sung. There may come a day when he no longer holds a guitar, when the tours end, and no one hears Thunder Road from his own voice again. But that won't matter, because Bruce Springsteen is no longer just a man. He's the voice in someone's head at 3 a.m., the sound of an engine starting in an empty parking lot, the memory of a quiet father, an old promise still waiting, proof that we can live truthfully, no matter the cost. And perhaps in a world growing louder by the minute, the name Springsteen will be remembered not for what he sang, but because he never stayed silent. Have you ever heard a Bruce Springsteen song and felt like he was writing about you? If so, share that moment in the comments, because sometimes an old song is the only thing that keeps us standing.